3 months before the summer of love, on Holy Maundy Thursday, I heard the garage door behind me open. Then I heard nothing for weeks, months. Out of the hospital rehab, Tina, my black babysitter, hopping from one side of the living room to the other, with her panties down to the beat of Bunny Sigler's "Come On Baby, Let the Good Times Roll," that kick-ass 1967 version. "Good girl," I groaned out of earshot, as my little sister Ann snored on the top bunk, my old bed. Yes, now I walked like a mummy, spoke like a bandit, Truman Capote, when Mrs. White, our first grade teacher, introduced us to Martin Luther King, that Einsteinian mad scientist, the morning after he was shot. 14 years later, non-Virgin Mary was up for parole. Victims of her hammer in the Courier-Times newspaper. I read the gruesome details, glad I wasn't there in a sense. 1986, after flunking out of college, working at a plastics factory that has disappeared. My foreman Gary knew one of the kids who'd made the gruesome discovery in 1967. Gary said his buddy had turned gay. Funny thing is, Gary, who had a wife and kids, seemed quite gay himself, grabbing, pinching everyone's ass. I guess we were in jail. Checked into rehab in 2000, chemical abuse, split after 2.5 days, after reading the big blue book and the small yellow one, ethics. I didn't want to go over to the rehab side for 2 weeks and waste any more time. Walking, it took a while to get to Levittown, the old Mallory house where the crime happened. For years, the house had been emptied, superstitious families evacuating after they found out what happened there. Nice discovering 9 Peony Road unrecognizable after renovations like the other Jubilees. What happened to Mary the Hammer, whose well-to-do parents called her Petey because they'd wanted a boy, the only girl who could climb the high school gymnasium rope? Well, she was acquitted of a crime in 1938 in her hometown, where Walt Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe had roamed, Camden, New Jersey. The Milkman. Jack Kerouac flew to Paris with a little book, quirky, not his best. Jack was already on his way to Girard Heaven. The Milkman, on the other hand, was a happy fellow, until Holy Maundy Thursday, 1967, that magic year, when his wife and son met Mary the Hammer. Then he could have, the Milkman that is, he could have partied with Jack until 1969. Snow on the way. Everybody liked Ruth Ann or Tracy, 2 blondes in our 5th grade class. One day I decided to call Ruth Ann out because she liked athletic Hunter Tim, not me. All the boys behind me, all the girls behind Ruth Ann. I got her in a headlock, took her to the grass, let her up. Bernie called me out Thursday, the next day. All the boys behind me, all the girls behind Bernie. Bernie was kind of big, bigger than me, not exactly a freckled beauty. She'd handled a big gawky kid and little Chris. She wanted a fist, but I didn't hit girls anymore. I tackled her, a double-leg takedown I later learned. Had her pinned. "Get your balls out of my face," her red face grunted. I let her up. She wanted a fist. I tapped her breast and ran away. Walked over the bridge towards home as the snow began to fall. John Berryman Bridge. I was at Urban Vegetables watching Joan Jett cover The Little Drummer Boy. I'd been drinking a while like I did every weekend. Next thing I knew, it was dark and November 30th cold. Some urban vegetables employees inside a solid old Trenton, New Jersey home, hitting the keg, playing cards. I tap on the front door, tell them I was still outside. The bridge to Pennsylvania, that is just down the road, they'd reiterate. I opened my eyes. The sun was up. I knocked on the door. A four-eyed Native American answered. He let me in. He then told me to leave, seeing how thirsty I was. Bad Bob on guitar, me on drums. We played Wipeout, House of the Rising Sun, Jumpin' Jack Flash in our sixth grade classroom. Our teacher, Miss Mole, who played piano for the school assemblies. A J. Edgar Hoover in drag would occasionally grab Bob by the ear and drag him out to the hallway. Izzy, who sat next to me, told me she threw up if she stayed up too late. She tumbled on mats. Stevie Wonder's If You Really Love Me was a hit the year before. I had a dream one night Izzy was in my bed. A decade later, I was trying to read Kerouac's Subterraneans. Izzy was on the college gymnasium floor, cheering. We'd bump into each other in the vast library. Once we did. You remember me, she asked. Of course I did. She told me where she was living, which went in one ear and out the other. Izzy soon graduated and I didn't. Not digging the corporate campus radio station, Van Morrison. American Gothic. My conscious life began when I was 4 in August 1965 when a family, the Richards, moved into the house a few doors down from mine. I returned to the Richards house in July 1981 when I was at Emerald City, the old Latin casino in South Jersey. My buddies dug the headliner that night, 999, whose homicide was a hit on the English punk charts. Me, I considered Homicide a bad imitation of Sweet Home Alabama and Werewolves of London, a precursor to what Kid Rock's doing. I looked up on the stage, recognized one of the roadies, a fellow high school wrestler who'd placed third in the state tournament. I walked out to the shag-carpeted cave corridor, picked up an inexpensive Jim Morrison t-shirt. The Sugarman Hopkins bio was a year old. Back at the bar, the opening band, the Fleshtones, were on the stage, the drummer playing while standing, not on his throne. What was this? I found myself in the Richards' living room, their American Gothic hanging above their modest remains, Ed Sullivan, Batman television. Bluebirds, insects on a huge bus with black windows playing with their computers, phones. I was on the bus because I had given my alma mater, Bluebird University, a lot of money over the years. We were headed to our first loss, Belmont. Some consolation after the game, stopping for supper at a House of Blues. Jumped on an airplane the next day, headed to William S. Burroughs, Kansas. Got out in the freezing weather, headed to a New Year's Eve movie theater. True Grit or the Fockers. The next afternoon, the boys were down 30 points at the half, but it didn't get any worse. Better Homes and Gardens. We moved from nearby Levittown to Better Homes and Gardens in October '74. Getty, my new Italian neighbor, asked what kind of stereo I owned. Nobody had ever asked me anything like that. I told him I had a record player. Later, I found out the Marantz stereo belonged to Frankie, Getty's much older brother, not Getty. Getty told me another lie. His tavern-owning dad owned the entire strip mall, not just the tavern. Had the radio on in my new basement bedroom. Sparks, not David Bowie, and John, not Jim Morrison. Cale's Fear is a Man's Best Friend. Was knocking on a pal's door when some loud, fat, bespectacled guy pulled up in a small car. "You want to be a paper boy?" he asked me. I got in the car thinking Denny, his name, was okay, not John Wayne Gacy. Denny introduced me to some of my customers. Some thought I was a girl due to my long hair and prepubescence. A high school girl was stabbed to death at the Oxford Valley Mall on January 13th, 1975. My Levittown pals and I had ridden our bicycles to the new mall in August 1973, where I picked up J. Giles' Bloodshot. Give it to me. I was Don McLean checking out the sweet looking, though everything looks worse in black and white, Paul Simon. Peggy the slain girl on the front page of the Courier-Times. Days later, a cartoon sketch of her killer appeared. Could have been a high school concert choir singer who lived at the top of my dead-end road. I dropped the paper route. Couldn't do it and be a member of the junior high wrestling team. Kenny watched my first match, Denny that is, watching me pin myself. I considered myself a fraud, weak and inexperienced. Peggy's killer on the loose, it took a while. It was dark, weird, but things began to sweeten when spring arrived as I helped my dad out in the garden. Moon landing hoax. Dad and I made a record on top of the Empire State Building. It wasn't a cappella. Dad followed me as my mouth became Donovan's Sunshine Superman guitar. Dun, 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 boom, boom, boom. I collaborated with the Beatles at J.F. Edgar. Yeah, J.F. Edgar, that's right. I collaborated with the Beatles at JFK Airport. A hybrid version of Should Have Known Better before buying a plate at a restaurant, a French one. Uncle Delmore, not Delmore Schwartz, who died 3 summers before, lived in a Brooklyn brownstone, up 3 Lou Reed flights of stairs. The dumbwaiter, box tops crying on Sunday morning Wanderama TV. Returned home to Levittown, watched the Armstrong bounce around. Our modest black and white TV. Stephen Crane's Red Badge. Rainy square dance the night before. We 12-year-olds hiked with backpacks and sleeping bags to the other side of the corrupt reservoir. Cabin 9's tarp not far from Cabin 8's, my cabin. We ate our pink hamburger and near raw carrots, turned in. Ed, the head counselor, at the one end of the tarp next to my sleeping bag. His fatherly arm temp was cool on my sleeping bag, but not for long. I woke wondering why there was a huge, strong paw hand in my Fruit of the Looms yanking away at my naturally bald crank. Onion groans and vice grip, I clawed like a cat, rolling in my sleeping bag over my groaning mates to the opposite end of the tarp. When I woke, the sun was hung over, dripping from the trees, my mates making breakfast. We drank the cold spring water. I told my old buddy Brady, one of the Cabin 9 boys, about Ed. Brady's infectious laugh. I slept like a baby the next night, Friday, Ed under Cabin 9's tarp. Though, over at Cabin 9 there had been more drama. Scar, the pain-in-the-ass Jewish kid, had darted off into the woods, gotten in another skirmish with Alpha Dollars, the son, Trump-like son of a Manhattan restaurateur. But it was time to hike back to Camp Catskill anyway. We got out of the woods, into the sunlight. Brady and Buzzy, who was supposedly black, were weaving like drunks, dehydrated, victims of the seductive spring water. Ed stuck out his thumb, caught a ride to the Camp Catskill van. The rest of us remained on the guardrail laughing, chanting, "Homo you don't, Ed." Mysterious scar in cabin 9 when we arrived.